The walls in this building were never meant to keep secrets. Through the thin barrier separating my apartment from Unit 304, I caught fragments of lives I never asked to know. Arguments, laughter, the clatter of dishes at midnight. But that Tuesday evening, I heard something that made my blood run cold. Something that would haunt me long after the sun set on our quiet street. His voice, low and deliberate, cut through the silence like a blade. "I sold your beach house." There was no warmth in those words, no explanation, just a statement delivered with chilling finality. I pressed my ear closer to the wall, my heart hammering against my ribs. The voice belonged to Marcus Hale, the man in 304, a reserved figure I'd seen in passing but never truly knew. Everyone in the building was aware of his mother, Eleanor Hale, a vibrant woman in her 70s who visited every Sunday, her laughter echoing through the hallways like wind chimes. She spoke endlessly about her beach house in Montauk, the place where she'd raised Marcus, where every summer memory was painted in salt and sand. That house wasn't just property, it was her heart, her history, her refuge. Marcus's tone on the phone that night was void of emotion, almost mechanical. I heard him say, "It's done. The papers are signed." Then silence, as if the person on the other end had nothing left to say. My mind raced with questions I couldn't answer. Why would he sell something so precious to her? Had she agreed to this? Or was something darker unfolding behind closed doors? I pulled away from the wall, trying to shake off the unease settling in my chest. But the words clung to me like smoke. 2 days later, everything changed. I woke to the sound of sirens wailing outside our building, their red and blue lights bleeding through my curtains. I rushed to the window and saw police cars parked in front, officers moving with urgent purpose. Neighbors gathered in clusters on the sidewalk, their faces twisted with shock and confusion. Then I heard it, the whisper that spread like wildfire. "Eleanor Hale is missing." My stomach dropped, and suddenly that overheard conversation replayed in my mind, louder and sharper than before. I watched Marcus step out of his apartment, his face pale and unreadable, his hands trembling as he spoke to the detectives. He looked like a man caught between grief and guilt, though I couldn't tell which weighed heavier. The building buzzed with speculation. Some believed she'd wandered off, disoriented and lost. Others whispered darker theories, but I couldn't shake the image of him on that phone, his voice cold and final, talking about selling her most treasured possession. What really happened to Eleanor Hale, and why did her son seem so calm when the world around him was falling apart? The investigation moved swiftly, like a machine designed to uncover truths no one wanted to face. Detectives canvassed the building, knocking on doors, asking questions that felt both routine and invasive. When they reached my apartment, I hesitated, my hand hovering over the doorknob, wondering if I should tell them what I'd heard. But fear held me back. Fear of being wrong, of accusing an innocent man, of becoming entangled in something I didn't fully understand. So I said nothing, and the weight of that silence pressed down on me like stone. Eleanor's disappearance became the only thing anyone talked about. In the laundry room, at the mailboxes, in the elevator, her name was whispered with a mix of sympathy and suspicion. Some neighbors remembered seeing her last Sunday, carrying a bag of groceries, her smile as warm as ever. Others recalled Marcus acting strangely in recent weeks, distant and distracted, avoiding eye contact in the hallways. I began to piece together a portrait of a relationship I'd never paid attention to before, and the picture that emerged was far from perfect. I started watching Marcus more closely, though I told myself it was curiosity, not suspicion. He left his apartment at odd hours, his face shadowed and gaunt, as if sleep had abandoned him entirely. One evening, I saw him return carrying a cardboard box, his movements hurried and furtive. He glanced around before slipping inside, and I wondered what he was hiding. The rational part of my mind insisted there could be 100 innocent explanations, but the voice in my head, the one that remembered his cold words, whispered something darker. Then, 3 days after Eleanor vanished, I saw the real estate sign. It stood in front of a small office downtown, advertising the sale of a beachfront property in Montauk. My breath caught as I read the listing. Charming coastal retreat, recently available. The timing felt impossible to ignore, a thread connecting Marcus's phone call to his mother's disappearance. I pulled out my phone and took a picture, my hands shaking with a mixture of fear and determination. This wasn't just coincidence anymore. It was evidence, and I couldn't stay silent. That night, I lay awake staring at the ceiling, the darkness pressing in around me. I thought about Eleanor, about the life she'd built, and the love she'd poured into that beach house. I thought about Marcus, about the son who'd seemed so devoted, but now appeared shadowed by secrets. And I thought about myself, about the choice I faced, to speak up and risk everything, or to stay quiet and live with the guilt. The walls around me seemed thinner than ever, as if the building itself were holding its breath, waiting for the truth to break free. Morning came with a knock on my door that shattered the fragile calm I'd tried to build overnight. I opened it to find Detective Sarah Chen standing in the hallway, her expression professional, but her eyes sharp with purpose. She introduced herself, explained she was leading the investigation into Eleanor's disappearance, and asked if I'd noticed anything unusual. My mouth went dry as I stood there, the secret I'd been carrying suddenly too heavy to hold. I invited her inside, my heart pounding so loudly I was certain she could hear it. I told her everything: the phone call, Marcus's cold voice, the words about the beach house that had felt like a knife cutting through something sacred. Detective Chen listened without interrupting, scribbling notes in a worn leather notebook, her face betraying nothing. When I finished, she looked up at me with an intensity that made me feel exposed. "Why didn't you come forward sooner?" she asked, her tone neither accusatory nor kind, just direct. I had no good answer, only the truth. I'd been afraid, unsure, paralyzed by the weight of potentially destroying a man's life with my suspicions. She asked me more questions, about Marcus's behavior, about Eleanor's visits, about anything else I might have seen or heard. I mentioned the real estate sign, the box he'd carried into his apartment, the way he seemed to be unraveling. Detective Chen nodded slowly, as if pieces were falling into place in her mind. Before she left, she gave me her card and warned me to be careful. "If your neighbor is involved in something," she said, her voice dropping to a whisper, "then you've just made yourself a witness. Watch your back." The hours after her visit felt surreal, like I was living in someone else's nightmare. I couldn't focus on work, couldn't eat, couldn't shake the feeling that I'd crossed a line I could never uncross. Every sound in the building made me jump. Footsteps in the hallway, doors closing, voices muffled by walls. I kept glancing at my phone, half expecting a threatening message, though none came. The silence felt more dangerous than any confrontation, a calm before a storm I couldn't see coming. That evening I heard Marcus's door open. I froze, pressing myself against my own door, listening as his footsteps moved down the hallway. I counted to 10, then cracked my door open just enough to see him disappearing into the stairwell. Something compelled me to follow, a reckless need to understand what was happening. I grabbed my keys and slipped into the hallway, my pulse racing as I descended the stairs behind him, staying far enough back to remain unseen. He pushed through the exit door into the parking garage, and I hesitated at the threshold, knowing that whatever I was about to discover might change everything. Marcus moved through the dimly lit parking garage with purpose, his shoulders hunched as if carrying an invisible burden. I followed at a distance, ducking behind concrete pillars, my breath shallow and quick. He stopped at a black sedan, popped the trunk, and pulled out another cardboard box, similar to the one I'd seen him carry before. The box looked heavy, and he struggled with it for a moment before hoisting it into his arms. I pressed myself against a pillar, my heart hammering, wondering what could be inside that demanded such secrecy. He didn't return to the building. Instead, he loaded the box into the back seat and drove away, his taillights disappearing into the night like dying embers. I stood there, alone in the cold garage, feeling both foolish and terrified. What had I just witnessed? A man disposing of evidence, or simply someone dealing with his mother's belongings in his own way? The line between truth and paranoia blurred, and I realized how dangerous assumptions could be. But I couldn't shake the image of that box, couldn't stop wondering what secrets it held. The next morning brought news that sent shockwaves through the neighborhood. Eleanor's credit card had been used at a gas station 2 towns over, 3 days after she'd gone missing. The transaction gave everyone hope. Maybe she was alive. Maybe she'd simply left on her own, needing space or time. But Detective Chen's expression when she briefed the building told a different story. "We're investigating all possibilities," she said, her words careful and measured. I caught her glance in my direction, a silent acknowledgement of the information I'd provided. I couldn't shake the feeling that something was deeply wrong with the credit card story. If Eleanor was alive and well, why hadn't she contacted anyone? Why would she leave without a word, abandoning the life she'd built and the son she'd raised? And why would Marcus have been selling her beach house before she'd even disappeared? The pieces didn't fit, and the more I tried to force them together, the more jagged the edges became. That afternoon, I made a decision that would either reveal the truth or destroy what little piece I had left. I drove to Montauk, to the address listed on that real estate sign. The beach house sat on a quiet street overlooking the ocean, its white paint peeling, its shutters weathered by salt and time. It looked abandoned, forgotten, nothing like the cherished sanctuary Eleanor had described. I parked across the street and watched, unsure what I was looking for but unable to turn back. Then I saw it, Marcus's black sedan pulling into the driveway, and my blood turned to ice. He got out, glanced around nervously, then retrieved another box from the trunk. I sank lower in my seat, my mind racing with possibilities too terrible to name, watching as he disappeared inside the house that might hold all the answers. I waited in my car as the sun dipped lower, painting the sky in shades of amber and crimson that felt too beautiful for the darkness unfolding before me. Marcus stayed inside the beach house for nearly an hour, long enough for doubt to creep in and make me question everything. Maybe I was wrong. Maybe grief made people do strange things. Maybe I was just a nosy neighbor spinning horror stories from fragments of truth. But then he emerged, empty-handed, his face pale and drawn, and locked the door behind him with a finality that made my stomach clench. I waited until his taillights disappeared before I approached the house. The front door was locked, but a side window sat slightly ajar, its frame warped by years of coastal weather. My rational mind screamed at me to leave, to call Detective Chen, to let the professionals handle this. But something stronger pulled me forward. The image of Eleanor's warm smile, the sound of Marcus's cold voice, the weight of secrets too heavy to carry alone. I pushed the window open and climbed inside, my hands trembling as I dropped into what looked like a dusty living room. The house felt frozen in time, filled with furniture covered in white sheets like ghosts waiting to be remembered. Photographs lined the walls. Eleanor as a young mother, Marcus as a child building sandcastles, summers captured in fading colors. The air smelled of salt and abandonment, thick with the ghosts of happier days. I moved through the rooms carefully, searching for I didn't know what, until I reached a door at the end of the hallway. It was the only one that looked recently used, its handle free of dust, a padlock hanging from the latch. My hands shook as I examined the lock, and then I noticed something that made my heart stop. It wasn't fully closed, just hooked through the latch as if someone had locked it hastily and imperfectly. I lifted it free, the metal cold against my palm, and pushed the door open. The room beyond was small, windowless, and at first glance appeared empty except for more storage boxes stacked against the walls. But then I saw it, partially hidden behind the boxes. A navy blue suitcase with a luggage tag still attached, and on that tag, written in elegant script, was Eleanor Hale's name. I stumbled backward, my breath coming in short gasps as the implications crashed over me like a wave. Eleanor's suitcase was here, in a locked room of a house Marcus had sold without her knowledge. She hadn't run away, hadn't used that credit card willingly, hadn't disappeared by choice. I grabbed my phone with shaking hands, ready to call Detective Chen, when I heard it. The sound of a car pulling into the driveway, an engine cutting off, a door slamming shut. Marcus had returned, and I was trapped inside the house with evidence that could either solve a mystery or get me killed. Panic seized me as I heard the front door unlock, the sound of footsteps entering the house. I looked around the small room desperately, searching for another exit, but there was none, just walls closing in and the terrible weight of truth I'd uncovered. I pressed myself against the wall beside the door, holding my breath, praying he wouldn't come down this hallway, wouldn't check this room, wouldn't discover me standing among the secrets he'd tried so hard to bury. The footsteps moved through the house, slow and deliberate, and I realized with growing horror that he was searching for something, or someone. "I know you're here," Marcus's voice called out, shattering the silence like glass. I saw your car across the street. My heart dropped, and I understood then that I'd been careless, too consumed by the chase to cover my tracks. His footsteps grew closer, each one a countdown to confrontation I wasn't prepared for. I gripped my phone tighter, my thumb hovering over Detective Chen's number. But before I could press it, he appeared in the doorway, his face a mask of exhaustion and something else. Not anger, but resignation. As if he'd been waiting for this moment all along. We stood frozen, predator and prey locked in a moment that felt suspended outside time. Then, to my shock, Marcus's shoulders sagged and he leaned against the doorframe, suddenly looking older than his 40-some years. "You found it," he said quietly, his eyes moving to Eleanor's suitcase. "I knew someone would eventually." His words hung in the air between us, and I realized that whatever I'd expected, violence, threats, denials, this broken confession wasn't it. He slid down the wall until he was sitting on the floor, his head in his hands, and I wondered if I was witnessing a murderer's breakdown or a son's grief. "Where is she?" I demanded, finding my voice though it shook with fear. "Where's your mother, Marcus?" He looked up at me with eyes that were hollow, haunted, and I saw something in them that made me pause. Not guilt, but pain so deep it seemed bottomless. "She's not dead," he said, his voice cracking. "She's alive, but she's gone." He explained then, words tumbling out like a dam finally breaking. Eleanor had early-onset dementia, deteriorating rapidly, and one morning she'd walked out and gotten lost, her mind trapped somewhere in the past. He'd found her 3 days later at a care facility 2 towns over, having no memory of her home, her life, or even her own son. The credit card transaction, he explained, had been him desperately trying to maintain the illusion that she was okay, buying time to figure out what to do. The beach house sale was to pay for her long-term care at a specialized memory facility upstate, a place she'd been moved to quietly, away from questions and pity. "I couldn't tell anyone," he whispered, tears streaming down his face. "I couldn't admit that she doesn't know me anymore, that I've already lost her even though she's still breathing." I stood there, the detective's card in my pocket, evidence of a crime that never happened, facing a truth more painful than any murder. That sometimes people disappear not because they're taken, but because their minds betray them, and the ones left behind carry the weight of that invisible loss alone. As sirens wailed in the distance, Detective Chen must have tracked my location. I realized the real mystery wasn't what happened to Eleanor Hale, but how we survive when the people we love become strangers wearing familiar faces.